London, Ontario on a fall evening in 2020, Carolinian Canada ecologists Ben Porchuk and Coral Wysocki prepared to travel more than 1,000 kilometers across southwestern Ontario for their organization's second annual Pawpaw Parade. This region is known as the Carolinian Zone, and it stretches from Toronto to Windsor, where more than 500 wild and rare species of plants thrive, including, you guessed it, the pawpaw tree. It's special because it's a Canadian forest tree that grows fruit. You may ask, wait, fruit in the forest? Yep, and it's delicious too. It's like a banana and a mango all in one. And the tree acted as a home for many other species, like the zebra-tailed butterfly, which has disappeared from Canada as it needs the pawpaw tree to survive. The Indigenous peoples of the zone hold strong cultural ties to the pawpaw tree too, but today, few people know about the pawpaw or have ever seen one. This is because there aren't many left. But the good people at Carolinian Canada are bringing the pawpaw back to help restore the fragile ecosystem. Ben, Coral, and the rest of Carolinian Canada asked people in the zone why they wanted a pawpaw tree, and we tagged along while they crossed the breadth of southwestern Ontario, delivering trees and creating a conversation about restoration and reconciliation.
All right, let's put it in there. One of the reasons, in addition to reconciliation, why we're so interested in having ambassador species like the pawpaw tree and the tulip tree and the rare cucumber magnolia, is that when it comes to things that are seemingly common, like the American basswood, there are so many things that are beneficial when you put in a basswood, from bees coming and pollinating them to all sorts of wildlife, like snakes, for example, are known when the basswood gets older to go right inside the trunk and lay their eggs inside, because it has decay, so it gives off heat, it gives moisture so the snake eggs can hatch in a couple of months, and so many other things that we take for granted with common species when we don't really get to know them. So the idea that we're creating a demand and we're reconciling nature and hopefully with First Nations communities by bringing around the rare things is that it almost heightens and gives so much more of a voice to those things that are a lot more common, but we just don't know about anymore because we don't really spend the time in nature. So we're really hoping that rare species like the pawpaw tree will really create a big swell of momentum for native trees and plants in general, so that we can have people really putting a high value on things like this, which, you know, I've had this tree in a pot. I bought it this spring thinking I would give it to someone, and so far no one's really wanted a basswood. So we're hoping that on this journey that we might be able to find someone and inspire them a little bit with everything that's going on, and they'll adopt a basswood for the greater good.
Love for the basswood. The tree of love. It looks,
yeah,
like
it does.
hearts.
Look at that. Look at
That's what I would
that.
call
I
this
mean,
tree.
it warms your heart.
The tree of hearts.
6 a.m. came early on day one of the Pawpaw Parade, as Ben and Coral traveled northeast from London to Kitchener, Ontario. Their first step would be meeting Nicola Thomas near Queen's Bush, one of Ontario's first black settlements.
This is the, as you can see, the British Methodist Episcopal Church and Cemetery. So, and this one was started, there's, over here you can see this gravestone. This is actually the Reverend Brown here, and this is his wife Priscilla Brown, and this used to be their farm. And he was born in 1798 in Maryland and came up here to find freedom. This was known as the Queen's Bush settlement area. There were churches and there were schools, but he started the first church here and this cemetery. So it's interesting that these are the two that we can tell who they are, because the others are sort of a little bit less known. But as you can see, the site is abandoned, and there's lots of them scattered across Ontario. So when they actually came here, what they found was that there were no white people here at the time. It was only Indigenous people, because the land here was so tough. They called it the wilderness because nobody had gone in and tried to do any agriculture. But for the people that were escaping, it was a perfect refuge because it was sort of in the forest. It was outside of where people were going, hence the name the bush, because it really was bush. And so they cleared all of the land and started farming and what have you. And then in about 1840, the Crown surveyed the land. So once they surveyed the land, then they put a price to the land. And then and none of the African diaspora, many of them couldn't afford it. I think the idea of permaculture seems new to us, but permaculture has been something that global Indigenous people would practice because food forestry was always a thing. They weren't really cultivating the land, they were enhancing what was there to suit their needs. So it's not necessarily that we created permaculture, because permaculture was something that even the Indigenous people to this area were already doing. Things like regenerative and restorative agriculture, these terms that we're used to, that term was coined by Dr. George Washington Carver in the States. He was the one that put that together and used that terminology when himself and Booker T. Whatley were working on sharing with people composting was important and these kinds of things. But, you know, African people back in Benin were doing this kind of restorative agriculture for a long time before. I think that as we did industrial, colonial type of farming, that's when we lost a lot of our natural habitats, and then obviously the species followed.
Now, if we're to look at it a little more deeply, not that it hasn't been depth so far, but we found these trees, we propagated them, they've been donated, we created a program, putting them in the ground here. You've worked pretty hard to get the permission to plant them here. And this is a gravesite, right? They're like all around here. So what's the kind of healing, like through time maybe even, that could be possible?
Yeah, it's interesting because, you know, this is going back 200 years, and some of the issues are still the same. So like I said, for me, I mean, I work with soil, and I think it's a soul to soil connection that we're talking about. So I'm excited that this is the first site, and doing this with you guys is really relevant because I plan to and hope to go to more of these cemeteries that are abandoned and listed as abandoned, and sort of bring people back to them and understanding what the people were doing here long before, that paved the way for us to do all of the agriculture that you see in this area now. You know, this was Reverend Brown's farm. They came up in waist-deep snow, without any snow clothes. Some of them would hollow out tree trunks and sleep inside of there. So this is the kind of hard struggle that they had that has gone unnoticed. I'm about bringing that back and getting that knowledge and having our contributions heard and understood and integrated into our histories. This is a fantastic step forward, and this is a beginning of something that I'm not sure what it's going to look like. I'm excited to move forward with it and share this knowledge and hopefully plant up a lot of these abandoned cemeteries with food. That doesn't necessarily have to be for people, but can be for increasing biodiversity, which is something that we do in permaculture.
Pawpaws to home base left the former Queens Bush settlement feeling reinvigorated, and after delivering several pawpaws to home-based native gardeners in Toronto, they continued on towards Niagara, where they met Brian Kahn at a youth outdoor education center for Indigenous knowledge and learning.
I'm super excited and grateful that you were welcomed here, and I mentioned earlier that a bit of the background is that we got some free trees last year And at first I thought, why don't I create an orchard somewhere and make $1 million off selling pawpaw fruit? And then I realized that the trees actually had to go to the people, since the Carolinian zone is 95% privately owned, that we'll find people that really care about it. So we created a program and put the word out there, and the response has been super exciting. There's so much love for the tree in so many different ways. We were wondering what the trees mean to you in your culture.
Well, these are one of the plants that would have been used by tradition, but it's the property that is really what's important about this gift that you're giving to us. This is a land that we're using for outdoor education, and it's an area that we're trying to bring back Indigenous teachings for the students. And so with that, this is helping to reacclimate the land back to a more traditional place of being. They're not just used for the shade, they're not just used for the structure or for the wood, for the fire. They provide us with the medicines. And I'm not as familiar with the pawpaw tree myself as far as traditional teachings. I know that it is part of our outdoor education, so I'll have to work with our outdoor education people to learn a little bit more about that. But the trees often provide us with medicines, and on this property there's a lot of maple trees, and we harvest the sweet water that comes out of the trees. So I'll be doing my research to find out exactly from a traditional perspective, because I know that this is a plant that was used in this land, or on this land. Myself, I'm from further west, so this is a foreign tree for me, but it is indigenous to this land, and so there will be teachings, and I will go to elders to get their teachings on how to properly care for, but also respect and harvest from the tree. We're working with the Niagara Conservation Authority to actually bring this back to a natural state. But at the same time, we also have to keep it somewhat cultured, because we do have students that come onto the property, and we can't have them going through the bramble of the bush. So we do need to have the grass that's here. But we're trying to marry the two needs. Well, returning nature, but also giving the students the freedom to explore.
Would you use the word reconcile those two needs?
That's the perfect word to go with it. And as we're headed towards Orange Shirt Day, it's the perfect combination of terms to use, absolutely.
After meeting Brian at the Outdoor Education Center, Ben and Coral traveled south towards Port Colborne to meet the next lucky recipient of a pawpaw tree, Ed Scorpio.
My name is Ed Scorpio. I live here in beautiful Port Colborne, Ontario, in the Niagara region, on an island in the Welland Canal. It's a great place for growing things because we're between two escarpments. We're between the top of the Niagara escarpment and the Onondaga escarpment, which comes up through Lake Erie. So we have kind of our own microclimate here. It's a lot of fun when the bad weather goes that way and that way, right around us. Well, I was very interested in getting a pawpaw tree. It's kind of a legend around here. I'm First Nations background, and one of the elders that I speak to frequently he was actually the first person that told me there were pawpaws around here. I didn't even know. So that was my first introduction to it, and I found out about it, and he said, well, I know where there's a couple. And I went, where? He goes, I'm not telling. It's kind of a great secret because there's so few of them here. And it's something that there used to be a lot more of. It's one of those things, we talk a lot about food sovereignty and foods that as Indigenous people we used to eat in this area. And certainly the people that moved here used to eat them initially. And now a lot of them are gone for one reason or another. They're in the way, or somebody thought they were weeds and destroyed them all. Certainly not the pawpaws, but you know, that's one of those things. Fruit trees sometimes tend to be a nuisance for people, and they don't like them, so they end up cutting down fields and fields of them. And other than the Osage Orange, which is about the other strange, unknown fruit that I've come across here, pawpaw, I've never actually seen one in the wild, so that was even more elusive.
So are you excited to get one?
Yeah, I've got two. It's awesome. I'm excited to plant them and hope they do well. I don't see why they shouldn't. Everything else here grows like crazy, so I'm hoping they grow like crazy and produce fruit, and then I won't tell anybody where these ones are.
Following their meeting with Ed, the parade headed west towards Six Nations. bend coral's arrival was eagerly anticipated, and everyone was ready to catch a glimpse of the elusive pawpaw tree.
Hi everyone, my name is Makasha Looking Horse. I'm 23 years old. I go to McMaster University in Indigenous Studies in my undergraduate. I'm from Six Nations. I'm Mohawk and Lakota. I'm Mohawk Wolf Clan, and I am the host of Indigenous Let's Talk Water. I wear a few other hats like the youth leader for Ohologo Youth Rites of Passage. And also I work as the youth coordinator for Indigenous Water Project. I wanted a pawpaw tree because they are native to this land, and we have one of the largest Carolinian forests here in Six Nations. And I think it's really important to plant the pawpaw trees here because I know that hardly any of our community knows about them. So it's really important that we can reconcile with the trees and learn more about them and teach our youth more about them. So right from when I was young, when I went through my rites of passage, that's one of the key things that were really important, is that we need to continue our way of life here with our medicines and with our ceremonies, with our way of life and taking care of the earth, and that's including the pawpaw trees.
Good day, Wayasta. So my name is Shar. My Ongwehowe Gayakono name is Sahio. That was my great-grandmother's name, and I am Cayuga Wolf Clan. So I heard about the Pawpaw Parade today, and we rushed down here to get here early to make sure that we got one. So for a few years now, I've been looking for the pawpaw, and nobody seems to know where to find them or who's growing them or if they're even in southern Ontario anymore. So yeah, like when we heard that you guys were coming, this was something that we definitely wanted to come and pick up. I've been a second language learner for about 5 years now. So in that process, I've heard a lot of stories, and there's nothing in our language, as far as I know, that they call the pawpaw. So I'm going to be interested to try and dig that up. But through those stories, I've just heard that it's something that we used to have around here and used to have in our traditional foods. But like I said, nobody really knows where to find it, or not a lot about it. But now that I have one, I feel like I feel more connected to it, and I want to go and kind of seek out that knowledge and find out more about it. So right now we started a garden this year, and we're growing a lot of our traditional foods, trying to stick to only heirloom seeds that have been passed down. So we've gotten some seeds from some of the growers around here. So to me, that's really connected to who we are in our culture and our language. A lot of that traditional knowledge is tied into the language that I feel like we can't really translate that to English and understand what that connection means unless we have our language. I can't tell you how important that language journey is, and if anybody can speak any of the language that they have, even if it's just to say a few words, I'm like, just do it. Even if you're not saying it right, just keep speaking it, because that was taken away from us, and that's something that we've had in my mind since thousands of years we've been here. More than that, like I really believe this is where we're from. We have such a strong connection to the land, and that's also why I think it's really important to have these indigenous plants coming back. I see them as having memories. That long line of seed carries that memories of our ancestors, just like we do. So that's why, like, bringing back our indigenous plants, our indigenous foods, is just as important as learning our language and learning our culture, because I see it like that. They have the same connection to our ancestors that we do.
Parade starting at the Aamjiwnaun First Nation.
In Ojibwe culture, everything is connected, so we know that. In Ojibwe culture, everything is connected. So we know that. When we talk about everything having a spirit, and even, talking about the Aamjiwnaun and how you can't really talk about the Aamjiwnaun without talking about the water, relationship with water, relationship with ceremony, relationship with all of the berries, the sustenance, and even in the creation story. The Ojibwe creation story has the bearberry. And so the bearberry was very important to providing that sustenance when it was needed and for creation to happen. So it's like even in the connection with plants goes back to creation. Most people look at First Nations and relationships and reconciliation as starting in the 1800s, like after the War of 1812. But there was a long history before that. So when we talk about the bridge and we talk about the archaeology, we've got repatriated remains that came back to the community that are like 1,000 years old. So that migration happened way before the recent history what everybody looks at and the recent before the treaties. So that's the important part for the community, is that they had that relationship with everything. So the water, the area, and so they don't say where are you from, they say from where does your spirit blow. So it's all about spirit and having that connection. Mom's father is from Chippewas, the Thames. That's where my mom's parents are from. And he died in the war. So when we went over to see where he was buried, because when she was younger, they never could afford that. And she brought, and I didn't know that, but she brought some soil from Chippewas of the Thames with her in a little baggie. And here she is, this little Ojibwe woman, going through all these customs and different things like that with this baggie of soil in her purse. And I had no idea. So when we get there to the grave, she's introducing herself and, talking to him. And she puts down this dirt. And I said, what is that? And she goes, oh, that's from back home. I brought it with me. She goes, I wanted him... through this. Okay. So I wanted him to have his land, his territory, even though he's over here. So I think when you talk land, it's important for people because they need to, that's where they are, and it goes back to spirit. It goes back to spirit of the people are from an area. So the relationship is that they say, if you need it, it will be here. So again, the mayapple is a plant that's been used because of the high vitamin C content. So you never had to worry about, like the diseases of like maybe not a vitamin C deficiency, because you knew that mayapple was something that you could rely on. We have a lot of the medicines here, and so that's the interest of the community too, is making sure that they know, like we grow all of the traditional, like the cedar, the sage, some of the sweetgrass, but also tobacco. And I think the other thing is that people are calling us up and saying, this is what I want to plant, do you have it? And if you don't, they'll tell us, well, I did see it, back behind, my grandpa's, the wild ginger was there. Okay. And it's heart medicine, right? So that's, they'll tell you where you think that they might know where it is, but that, what the medicine is used for. And the other thing that we always try to say is, like, when did we forget that this was beautiful, right? So, when you look at the asters and you look at, the goldenrod and that, they're beautiful. You don't have to go out to purchase them at, like a greenhouse of, plants that were imported. Right. You have to remember that, what's growing in your backyard and along the roadways is beautiful.
After meeting Sherilyn Johnston, Ben and Coral traveled south towards Leamington, Ontario, to deliver a tree to Robin Perkins of the Caldwell First Nation.
Robin Perkins, Geezus O'Donoson. I'm a counselor for Caldwell First Nation. Our traditional territory is Leamington and Point Pelee, Pelee Island as well. Our band office is located in Leamington. We have a membership of almost 400 people now, and we are currently awaiting our reserve status from the federal government of Canada. One of the things with divesting the lands back to First Nations, we're dealing directly with one of those issues right now, where in our territory there's divestitures happening, or at least the process has started. And this is why I say there's a lot of people that like to say we want to do reconciliation, and they like talking the points, but actually putting it into action like you have, you don't see, because we were left out of conversations to do with the divestiture in our own territory. So, you know, I think it's baby steps, and it's nice to hear the talking points, but when reconciliation happens, it's when action takes place and a relationship is built, and relationships are a two-way street. So, you know, you gifted us these, and we're going to make sure that they flourish. You know, if you pretend the water and the land is your best friend or your mother, you wouldn't treat it so terribly. And that's how, you know, this is Mother Earth. That's why we treat the land, the water, with so much respect, is because without it, we wouldn't be here. And the ones for the nation, you know, there's a lot that speaks to what you're doing with reconciliation. You know, our nation has always been forgotten, and it means a lot that we're being acknowledged, and that you came to our territory and you brought these plants for us to plant and help, just to help revitalize them. And I think that speaks a lot to Caldwell First Nation, is that we're trying to get our people back home and we're trying to revitalize our culture. And this means so much. It's a good part of healing. It's another teaching that we can have for our people, for our youth. And hopefully eventually we'll be sharing meals using these plants. And everybody knows that meals, we love socializing, we love our meals, and that's how we celebrate with each other, is through a meal.
Ben and Coral continued the parade to the second to last stop, where they met Sarah Emmons, who runs a small, sustainable goat farm in Southwold, Ontario.
I feel really strongly that that every farm should be its own little ecosystem and should function that way. So in addition to leaving space for ourselves, for the goats, for the chickens, for the hay crop, we've also made sure to leave fairly significant chunks of habitat available, right? And I think the best approach to do that is on marginal land that's not super productive for farming anyways. And that way you're building that resilience into the landscape. And I think that's especially important right now when we see we're getting some very devastating effects with climate change. We're seeing flooding and fires. And anytime that you can build that resilience into the landscape through biodiversity, through water management, through soil management, I feel like you make not only your farm stronger, but you make your whole community stronger as well. To have balance in our communities, right, and have these conversations and have reconciliation in the communities, but also at a landscape level. And I think that's really reflected, you know, when we talk about biodiversity as well. You know, I don't have 100% native plants on this farm. I have a whole medicinal plant garden where many of the things are from Europe, right? And I have medicinal plants that are from North America. And I think that's maybe a lovely representation of how those things can coincide.
The last stop of the Pawpaw Parade took place in the Oneida Nation. This is where Ben and Coral linked up with Brandon Dockstader and planted trees with him as night fell around his local community.
Saguli swagweg, Brandon Dockstader ni Yongets, Ogwali ni wagi delod, Onyet daag ungwehuene. So what I just said was, hello everyone, my name is Brandon Dockstader. I'm Bear Clan from the Oneida Nation of the Thames. So my role in my community is two parts. One, I work as the environment and consultation coordinator for Oneida, doing environmental projects and working with outside proponents. And I also work for Carolinian Canada as their Indigenous leadership coordinator. So that's working in the broader Carolinian zone and working with Indigenous communities, trying to provide environmental programs, getting them involved and all that stuff. So it's such an amazing opportunity, and I'm so glad that this Pawpaw Parade has been happening, and you know, we're being able to get out to different communities and revitalize one of these lost species. Such a cute tree, such a cute plant, and I'm so glad that we're here today being able to plant this tree, to be able to revitalize it. It's such exciting work, and I'm looking forward to the next 5-10 years when this tree is blossoming and when we're able to produce plants and make it even grow further. So that's such a great opportunity, and I'm so excited for that.
So the roots means I really want to get into the ground.
I know we need each other. I know our love is strong. A lot of trees,
Yeah. I just wanted to say yawango, or thank you, to not only Carolinian Canada, to you guys for providing this opportunity, for working so hard, and you know, thank you for all the commitment you guys have done in terms of revitalizing this tree, you know, and thank you to the Pawpaw tree for all that it does as well in terms of providing the fruits, its responsibilities, and our responsibilities to make sure that that system continues. So, you know, I just wanted to say, yawango, thank you guys for providing that opportunity for all the communities, all the people in southwestern Ontario. I know that it must mean a lot, and it's very exciting. And hopefully over the years we can watch these trees grow up and develop, and in a few years we can come back and harvest them, and it'll be beautiful, and plant more, right?
Sounds awesome.
Yes.
Thank you.
So yeah, I won't go for that.
Thank you.